Hi, and welcome to Oxford Analytica's video briefing. I'm Dr. Chris Oates, analyst for North America, and I'm joined with Alison Baily, senior analyst for the Middle East. We're here to talk about Iraq. There's been quite a lot in the news about Iraq, the plight of the Yazidis trapped on Mount Sinjar, Kurdistan, U.S. possible intervention, at the very least a military air campaign. Now, we're not going to talk about the day-to-day operations. It's very fast-moving, it's very fluid, and it's very difficult to get solid facts out of Iraq. But we are going to look at the broader picture and what are the near and medium-term implications for that. So, Alison, I'd like to start first just by asking, why has this been an issue that's so prominent in the past couple of weeks? We know that ISIS, back when it was ISIS, took over Fallujah in January, but it seems as if the past few weeks have seen more rapid gains than expected, and almost a tipping point that drove President Barack Obama to authorize military airstrikes in Iraq.
Well, you're right there. The Islamic State has really pushed forward and accelerated very quickly over the last few weeks, really ever since this surprise defeat and retreat of the Iraqi army from Mosul on June 10th. And since then, the group has been really advancing over most of the Sunni-dominated areas of Iraq and really establishing itself as the as the primary Sunni fighting force in Iraq. So what we've seen in the last few weeks is really now a question of this group trying to carve out some sort of de facto borders against the Kurdish areas of Iraq, because currently the Sunni areas that are under its control, and that it wants to try and establish some kind of durable government in. To do that, it really needs to have some kind of demarcated borders with the Kurdish area, since they share a 1,000-kilometer long border.
Now, this also took place at the same time when in Baghdad, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki had gone through an election. His party won the most seats of any single party, but it did not have a majority, and they were negotiating a new prime minister. Now, a possible candidate has come forward. Maliki, at the time of our recording, is still trying to hold on to power. Do you think that the uncertainty in Baghdad, the political transition there, gave the Islamic State and ISIS the opportunity to go through the Sunni areas, and therefore once Baghdad sorts out its own political situation, it will be able to easily take back the Sunni areas? Or do you think that those are two unrelated issues that just happened to occur at the same time?
Well, certainly the political disunity in Baghdad and the very long and tumultuous showdown between the mainstream Sunni political establishment and Maliki's government is really at the root of this crisis that we're seeing here. And that's enabled the Islamic State to really step into this vacuum in the Sunni areas and champion the Sunni community, ordinary Sunnis there, against the Maliki government, which it really views as an occupier of its areas. So the key thing now is really, with Maliki seeming to be on the way out and with a new, more conciliatory candidate in the shape of Haider al-Abadi forming a new government now. So how will that really affect the stability outlook? And you know, we'll have some long, drawn-out discussions. We may see a new unity government agreed sometime towards the end of August, early September. But I think even if we do see that agreement coming into shape and an effective unity government happening, I think it's still a case of the Islamic State retaining control of these Sunni-dominated areas. They may be more vulnerable to attack from Kurdish Peshmerga forces who would be more united with the federal Iraqi forces, but they'll still be able to really retain territorial hold, because essentially the Kurdish and federal government forces are not strong enough by themselves to take them on.
And so that leads into a discussion about the United States. If the Kurdish and Shiite forces aren't strong enough to take on ISIS on their own, will the United States be able to provide that extra support that tips them over the edge into taking back? Now, I think what we've seen so far is that the U.S. is willing to defend Kurdistan and to defend isolated incidents of humanitarian need, such as with the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. Now, do you think, from the Middle East perspective, that Baghdad and Erbil calling for more U.S. support will encourage Washington to step up the attacks, or do you think that it will be similar to the calls for support in January, fall on not deaf ears, but ears that have their own logics?
I think there's a real understanding in the region about the limitations of what the US appears willing to do and not to do. It's clear that the airstrikes that we've seen in recent days have set some kind of a line for the Islamic State and shown that there is this sort of frontier that over which it cannot cross, and sort of protecting Erbil. It seems very clear that to local players on the ground that is what the US is prepared to do, and that message will also be taken to include Baghdad as well, and the Islamic State will be aware that perhaps the same kind of airstrikes could be forthcoming if it does launch a major campaign to destabilize and launch large sort of ground sort of militant units into Baghdad.
I suppose one of the difficulties is that in this type of situation, isolated incidents of extreme violence that aren't expected can cause the United States into action it otherwise wouldn't have considered. Now, I mean, we saw with MH17 in eastern Ukraine, the European Union had been cautious on sanctions, and that galvanized them into something new. In the United States, I believe that the possibility of genocide was one of the main drivers of Barack Obama authorizing these strikes. And so if something were to happen, such as the Mosul Dam being opened and floodwaters traveling down the river, that could be the type of thing that catalyzes the U.S. into increased attacks. That would be somewhat difficult because they might want to go to Congress for an authorization. Congress, as we've seen over the past 2 years, it's very difficult to get anything through. But this is one of those issues, because it is Iraq and because it's dealing with Kurdistan, who's been one of the few reliable U.S. allies in the region, I think might go through. So I could foresee an increase in U.S. military intervention, not to the point of a full war with major numbers of infantry in northern Iraq, but I think special forces, drones, and an air campaign are not considered by the U.S. public to be a war. When we hear talk about the U.S. public as war-weary, I think those types of things, like the drone strikes in Yemen, in Pakistan, like the bin Laden raid, aren't really categorized as part of a war. But then again, it is very difficult to predict because the Islamic State is quite unpredictable, and we didn't think that it would attack Kurdistan. We thought that would be a quiet border, and then all of a sudden it started marching towards Erbil.
Well, I think that the key thing that the US may take into consideration about further military operations against the Islamic State is really how to distinguish between the Islamic State radicals and between the Sunni community, the ordinary Sunnis, the tribes, the former Iraqi army officers who have sort of rallied to its cause. And I think Obama has been clear from the beginning of this crisis to try and avoid getting involved on one side or the other of what is at its heart a very sort of long-running and partisan internal conflict between the Shia and the Sunni.
Okay, Alison, well, thank you for that. It is a complex and it's a fast-moving topic, so for more information, please feel free to read the Daily Brief. We cover Iraq frequently, or to be in touch with us or any of the analysts at Oxford Analytica. Thanks for watching.